Of the Times to kick off with. The headline there is airline boss wants extra checks on Muslim men. So
yes.
Tell us more.
Michael O'Leary, the ruler for life at Ryanair, has said that Muslim men should receive closer attention from security when they fly. And I think it's always, my view is it's always rather unfortunate when something that it potentially is worth listening to is said by Michael O'Leary, who I regard as the Gerald Ratner of aviation. He says horrible things about his own customers, he says horrible things about other people, he says horrible things about fat people and people like that. He may here have a point, and I think one of the interesting things that he does to try to cushion himself from the attacks on him by the usual suspects, which are all over the front page of the Times, is to point out that when he was a younger man, the threat to the United Kingdom came from Ireland, a point on which I think his position is pretty unimpeachable. And he was saying, well, I should have been the sort of person you should have been paying close attention to at the time, because the threat came from Irish men who meant to do small subsection of Irish men who meant to do harm on the British mainland. So here too, his point is, we ought to be paying more attention to those most likely to offer the threat. And what you're really getting is the fact that the hint that our security services are doing precisely the reverse, are seeking to bend over backwards and say we're not paying particular attention to people based on the characteristics that might very well mean they pose the most threat.
What's your view on this, Polly?
So I think it's certainly true that, as Michael O'Leary says, our security services and our police forces should do whatever is necessary to keep us safe without sort of worrying that they'll be called racist and so they mustn't do something if that thing is a thing that will keep us safe. I think simply just diving in and saying we therefore have to sort of single out anyone who looks a bit Muslim at an airport for extra scrutiny is a problem, because he says men of a Muslim persuasion. First of all, we've just seen the story of a class act, I think, the man who was attacked at the Central Mosque in London, the Muezzin, who has said he forgives his attacker. That is a Muslim man. Should that man be singled out for additional checks at airports? That seems a bit odd. There's also the fact of what is it that it is to look like a Muslim. There are Muslims who are black, and there are Muslims who are white, and there are Muslims who have brown skin. They don't all just dress up in the kind of the hat and the beard. And in fact, if the security services were to announce that we are going to single out for extra checks people with a hat and a beard, then obviously they would shave and they would send in the white people. Richard Reed, for example, the shoe bomber was white, or it would be women who were sent in. So the idea that it's as simple as saying we'll take those Muslims and we'll just check them extra is, I think, misguided. And the danger is that it creates a sense that you just discriminate against people, often people with brown skin, that actually drives more people to be worried about the liberal society that we're trying to defend, and doesn't in fact keep us safer.
Yeah, you're making reasonable points about how difficult it might be to identify A, the threat, and B, the religion of somebody in the first place. And that might make it harder to ascertain whether someone is Muslim in the first place and whether they offer a threat. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try, of course. And I think that what he's trying to get at here, and he's got a lot of heat for it from Muslim Council of Britain calling him racist and so forth. Quite predictably, he was going to get this kind of criticism. I think what he's trying to get at is a point that's been made for a long time. Mark Stein, back in the day when he wrote for The Spectator, got into trouble for writing a column saying, "Stop frisking crippled nuns," which he was seeking to make the rhetorical point that the security services were trying ever so hard to demonstrate they weren't bigoted or biased, that they were almost deliberately searching people who were plainly no threat. Michael O'Leary, brackets, huge seller of package holiday type flights, points out that families who may or may not be flying on airlines like his are less likely to pose threats than others. Now, you could take the case that it might make it more likely that jihadis start smuggling families or having families in their attack. But nevertheless, he may have a point, and I think it would be a shame if he shouted off the airwaves by dint of the confected outrage.
Certainly, we should be targeting the people who are the most dangerous. But what's also important is to note that actually far-right extremism is a huge threat at the moment. Just this week we have had attacks in Germany on Muslims, and the idea that Muslims are only a threat because there is this Islamist doctrine which is driving real serious danger both in the UK and abroad. Of course that's true, but Muslims are also persecuted around the world. Muslims are also targets of right-wing fascist attacks. And so again, this simplistic view that the only people who are dangerous are Muslim, I think is more dangerous than helpful.
I don't think anyone did say they're the only dangerous people, and nobody said they weren't under attack in other ways either. But I've never understood the position that says, well, because what about this other threat? We shouldn't look at the threat
No,
that we're discussing
we should
now.
look at both.
Never understood it.
Okay, I'm going to move on because I know that there's a big debate to be had that's triggered by the front page of The Express, or I'm anticipating that, I may be wrong. They are focusing on the issue of BBC licence fee.
So we have talked about this before. The BBC is removing automatic free licences for pensioners over 75. They were given responsibility for this decision by the government, and the government and the Daily Express, which obviously has a more elderly readership than many other papers, is quite upset about it. I think it is madness for us to give free TV to pensioners as if all pensioners are poor. If we think that people who are poor need to get free TV, or people who are disabled need to get free TV because they're more likely to be isolated, we should give free TV the people who need it, not this random selection of people who happen to be old. But of course, a change from one policy to another always creates losers, and the Daily Express is going to scream and shout, I think, until this happens.
And the logic Polly has set out applies, with which I agree completely, applies to the winter fuel allowance. And the reason that it's so important that people like us who aren't in elected politics make these points is that those who are in it are terrified of the older vote because they turn out in droves and like the winter fuel allowance and like free TV licences, whether or not on a means-tested basis they might actually get it. Then I wouldn't be giving free TV licences to elderly people in this country because I don't think we should have TV licences. I think it's absurd that we have one broadcaster propped up effectively by your inability to access the rest without breaching the law unless you pay somebody a Danegeld at risk of imprisonment in order to watch their channel, which increasingly you don't want to watch in the first place.
This is where I thought we might get the argument, because I imagine that's not something, from just having heard you previously, that you may not agree with. Am I right there?
Yes, I mean, people can watch a lot of TV now without having a licence fee, so long as you don't watch live TV. I don't have an aerial that works, so I can't watch live TV. But that's a separate issue. About 200,000 people, we think, have opted out that way. I think the BBC has a really important role to play in our nationhood. Actually, it's a part of our soft power around the world, and to jeopardise that, I think, would be a strategic error for the government and for Britain as a whole. Obviously, the BBC has to evolve over time, and its funding model will come under pressure. But it does offer fantastic value for money, and I think it should be sustained for as long as it can be.
You can't have it both ways. If it offers fantastic value for money that everybody loves, then people would pay for it voluntarily on a subscription basis. But then to scream that it would do it down if we didn't have the licence fee and you must force people nevertheless to pay for it seems like having your cake and eating it.
Do you think that's right? If it's popular, people will pay a subscription fee happily?
I think lots of people would, but of course the pensioners that the Daily Express is concerned about would lose out, and that sense of it being a service for all of us, and particularly the public service broadcasting elements of it. The BBC is a world-class news organisation, second only obviously to Sky News. And it also produces, local news, local radio, perhaps not perfectly, and actually protecting that infrastructure is incredibly
It's a very nice way of saying other people should subsidise my choices whilst I get to feel worthy about making them do it.
I'd be happy to pay more to ensure that...
Do it. Write them a cheque, they'll cash it.
Okay, let's move on to the front page of the Daily Telegraph next, and it's actually one of their, not their main story, one of the other stories on the front page. MI6 recruiting teenagers to give it an edge in tech race.
Well, this is going to be very exciting news in my home. My daughter is only 8, but she's determined to be a spy, and this means she's got 3...
It's only a matter of time before it gets down to 8, right?
Yeah, exactly. I probably sabotaged her chances by talking about this on television. So never mind, I won't give you her name. And she's trying to learn to code because she feels that hacking is a sort of essential skill for being a spy. So MI6 is now going to open up recruitment at the age of 18 to try and get into this kind of the digital natives generation, people who've been online their whole lives and understand the way information happens these days.
I think it's a great idea in a couple of other ways too. The first is that by recruiting explicitly at 18, you're at least implying that people don't need to go to university to get this excellent job, which is a very important principle. Not everyone needs to go to university if they want to work in a particular job, and our assumption that we should force everyone who's got an ability to go to university just because they should, I think, is crackers. The second thing is it very neatly unpicks the expectation that everyone that goes to work at Vauxhall Cross for our spooks is from Oxbridge, and that's a big part of the kind of expectation. It's not for me, or So rather than unpicking that and trying to say, well, we should go to this institution or that institution, this careers fair or that careers fair, rather than getting your apple from the barrel, they're going to get it off the tree.
Okay. Yeah. I rather like that image.
It's from the Untouchables.
Oh, okay. I thought it was original. Oh, well. We're going to take a break now. Coming up after the break, though, some might say it should be easy to beat Donald Trump, but are the Democrats already on the ropes? We'll discuss that next. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me tonight, Polly Mackenzie and Alex Dean. We're going to turn inside the Times next to their world double-page spread, and they're focusing on the race to be the Democratic contender.
And most specifically, the way that the money is narrowing down really between Bernie Sanders on the one hand, on, it's fair to say, the left of the campaign, and Michael Bloomberg, who's of course not always been a Democrat, on the, as he would wish it to be seen, the centrist right of the Democratic movement, and starving their other competitors of donations, at least for the moment. And the debates may mean that people make more donations.
And money does matter a lot in
really
American
matters.
elections.
They used to call it the first primary before people started basically self-funding their campaigns because they were so wealthy. The test of whether you could get into the first race, whether you could get into New Hampshire or Iowa, was whether you could raise enough money. And it looks like a number of the candidates, especially Warren, is now running out of cash.
Well, yes, and it does set up this fascinating idea that you could end up with Donald Trump, who's obviously hugely personally wealthy, against Michael Bloomberg, should he make it through that far.
Well, if you're fighting a New York billionaire who could have run for either party, plainly the answer is another white male New York billionaire who could have run for either party, right?
Yes, and Bloomberg has put forward quite an amusing shtick, actually, about Trump just not being very wealthy and there was a great comment, I think somebody said, wouldn't it be funny having 2 billionaires? And he said, 2 billionaires? Who's the other one? Questioning the idea that really Trump has any money at all, because of course Bloomberg made his money, whereas Trump started off with a very substantial inheritance. I mean, the thing is, Bloomberg came in late to this race. He didn't participate in those early runoffs, and he has come in and he has not made a great start. His performance in that debate was pretty wooden. Elizabeth Warren did a great job kind of taking him apart. The problem is he's got way more money than anybody else, and he's not even taking donations.
It feels like he's everywhere because the airwaves are flooded. I was in the States recently. The airwaves are flooded with him, even in states he's not running in. He's got more than 1,000 staff on the ground already, which if you think about the state of British politics, where you count staffers by single digits, it's astonishing to think that he had 1,000 staff on the ground doing his campaigning even when he wasn't in some of the first few races. Warren has a good ground game as well with activists, but it looks like the person who a lot of people think won the last debate is going to get squeezed out. She's already into her credit line, which campaigns tend to arrange as a fallback. She's already drawing down on what is a relatively small credit line to keep her campaign going. Unless she picks up in donations soon, no matter how well she does in these debates, she won't carry on.
And it's got a long way to run, let's face it, hasn't
Yeah.
it? Okay, let's turn quickly to the front page of the Financial Times. And there's I can't say we often talk about Treasury yields.
Not often enough.
But I'm sure you'll make it exciting for us on the front page.
Well, it becomes sexy by dint of being driven by the coronavirus, which of course influences almost all stories. But, when there is doubt and when there's concern about stability, very often people put their money into treasuries. And one of the reasons that we've seen yields on US treasuries hit an all-time low, which is what makes this newsworthy, this is the lowest return you'd ever get for investing your money with the US government, is that so many people now want to do it. So many people are concerned about the impact on manufacturing and supply chains that and there's a lot of money around in the international markets, that they are sticking it in US treasuries, even though the return is tiny.
Because obviously a lot of people's concern will be about their health, but the health of the economy is also a factor.
Massive. I mean, China accounts for about 25% of all manufacturing. We've got empty ships and shipping containers all around the world as a result of factories being closed. It will have a huge impact in China, but having a knock-on effect everywhere. And it allows America to use what's been described as an exorbitant privilege, because in the end, it's the safest place for your money to go. They can run these extraordinary deficits, run debts up that sort of dwarf their economy, because they know that the money comes home when people panic, and that's what's happening here.
very quick look at Daily Mail's page 3, because there's a story here about stamp pricing.
From Treasury yields to a financial tip, if you buy stamps this month and use them next month, you'll have made an 8% return, because stamps are going to jump some 8% to 76p for a first-class stamp. That's assuming you ever use stamps anymore. But if you do, you're going to make an 8% return in a single month. Not bad.
Alex is not a regulated financial advisor.
No.
Take any advice.
That is a fact. That is actually true.
Well, fundamentally, postage is moving away from letters to parcels, and that is not an area where the Royal Mail has a monopoly. So they have to put up the prices, and it's getting more and more expensive.
Okay, Alex and Polly, you'll be back again at 11.
We will.
But for the moment, thank you.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, there'll be plenty of showers tomorrow, concentrated in the with me, and pretty much a different story on every front page, I think. So plenty of different issues to get your teeth into. You've picked out the Daily Telegraph's front page story to start with, and the headline is "Revealed the Carbon Offsetting Wild West." So what do they mean by that?
So the Telegraph has done an investigation into a range of new carbon offsetting schemes and firms. As climate change has kind of risen up the political agenda, lots of companies and individuals are wanting to make changes in order to reduce their carbon impact. And that means that lots of new opportunities are opening up, not just for legitimate ways of planting trees, offsetting carbon, but also for scams. And it's why, as we kind of go through this climate change transition, we need to make sure that we regulate these kind of schemes effectively. Make sure that we that things that say, you know, I'm going to plant a forest in the Sahara Desert. Some skepticism is applied to those, and that firms and companies who want to offset their carbon can have confidence that what they're buying is a genuine product. Otherwise, the danger is people will not cut their own carbon, think it's fine, I'll fly as much as I like because I'll plant those trees in Africa, only the trees don't get planted, and the whole thing's a disaster.
The other next bad ramification of stories like this is that it reinforces some concerns or suspicions that people have around this area in the first place. You know, why should I bother recycling? It all goes into landfill anyway. Well, no, largely it doesn't actually, but people have those kinds of concerns, and this reinforces the idea that you can ignore the environment and, of course, all a big scam. The second thing that it does is that it undermines the very real achievements that we've made in this country, where the UK has done better than anyone else in the G20 at reducing our own carbon footprint. And if you see that actually this is a big scam, and as they rightly say, the Wild West, where people are taking money for carbon offsetting and then not doing it, then people will think, well, why should I bother to be proud about what the UK's achieved? In fact, is it really true in the first place, or is it bogus? So it undermines both the inclination to commit to more activity like this and undermines our belief in what we've achieved so far. So we really should clamp down on these things. But my one thing I would be concerned about is if people who in good faith have commissioned carbon offsetting, not knowing that it's a scam, then find that they somehow get drawn into the litigation, or that their carbon offsetting was not valid and they have to do it again. That would be disastrous for the environmental movement.
And clearly, scams are deeply worrying and rather depressing when people are trying to do the right thing. But what about the issue of carbon offsetting in the first place? Some say that for some companies, they're using it as a reason not to be environmentally friendly themselves. I think, well, I'll plough on doing less environmentally friendly practices, but if I just pay for a bit of carbon offsetting, then it'll make me feel okay about it.
Yeah, I think there is that real danger. There is only so much carbon offsetting we can do, right? There's only so many trees we can plant. There's only so much carbon we can bury under the oceans. Of course, technology is always being invested in and new things are being developed. But we have to change the kind of power we rely on. We have to stop using coal. We have to stop using oil and transform the kind of gas we use as well in order to minimize the amount of carbon that we're putting out. We probably need to travel less, use digital technology more. And what we mustn't do is not bother with any of that because we're going to do the carbon offsetting. Unless and until technology makes enough advances that we can get to the carbon targets we've set out without.
I accept the premise of your question. There is something akin to the indulgences about, I can do what I like as long as I pay my fee into this scheme. But on the other hand, let's say Polly's right and all the things she says about limiting energy. I think you're going to struggle on the travel one, because telling people they have to live worse lives than their forebears is a very hard sell. I think we shouldn't be too hair-shirt about the environment. We should make people think that they can go with the grain of better lives rather than meaning you've got to live diminished lives. But anyway, my point is that as long as we are where we are now, and until we have the next generation of technology and power that means we emit less, we still have to keep the lights on. So whilst we're doing that and we're using fuels that are imperfect, it's better that people make some effort than make none. And that's why undermining such schemes with this kind of scam stuff is so concerning.
Okay, let's move on now to a double-page spread in the Times tomorrow, which focuses, it focuses on a lot of different things, but the bit that you wanted to talk about was Rishi Sunak, pictured there. We might even talk about the picture, and the upcoming budget, which he will preside over.
Yeah, I'm actively nervous about talking about the policies he's floating, because they are all policies I support quite strongly, and that's a bit dangerous if the Conservative Party is going to charge in with some policies I support. Land value taxation.
Because you're, as a Liberal Democrat, you mean?
Well, I'm not a Liberal Democrat, but I am a Liberal and I'm a reformer, and the Conservative Party, if it's going to invest in social care, raise the personal allowance on national insurance, fantastic. I'm so excited that I daren't be excited. So instead I'm going to be very upset with Rishi Sunak for drinking Yorkshire tea, which I think is deeply unpleasant and far too strong. And if he wants my vote, he's going to have to shift to Earl Grey.
And of course, he's a Yorkshire MP, isn't he?
He has to try harder because, of course, he's from, I'm going to guess, Hampshire, I think, one of the southern counties. And as a soft southern blow-in, you always know that someone's from Yorkshire because they tell you immediately and then repeatedly. So, he's got to try twice as hard.
You're going to get a lot of
Oh, my God, I know. And, of course, I love him. But he has to try really hard to demonstrate his Yorkshireness. And about half of the responses on his tweet promoting this picture are from people in Yorkshire saying either you can't pull the wool over my eyes, you soft southerner, or okay, you're all right by me now. So he's tried hard.
He does have 1,040 Yorkshire tea bags. I mean, that's
a lot of tea bags.
I think we need to worry about the deficit given the investment he's made.
So the idea is that he's making tea for his team while they work out all their different policies. So they are floating these. The paper is certainly floating these as possible ideas. Where have they come from? Are these leaks that we've had that are kind of kites that are being flown, or is there real information?
Leaks imply that things are done accidentally. Organisations will test policies, most especially the government, will test policies in advance of their launch by stories like this, seeing how they go down. And the most significant one is an attempt to remove the business rates, which have been so ruinous for our high streets, and charging people more for being in a shop in a town centre than they would be charged for being in an out-of-town facility, which is widely accredited, along with the rise of shopping online, of course, with hollowing out our high street and leading to one of our national cri de coeur about what our towns are going to be, and replacing that instead with a land tax, because at the moment, of course, the tenant is paying all of that tax in the rates, and it discourages people from being right where we want them to be in town centres.
And of course, an attempt to bring in a land tax is what brought down the Liberal government in 1909 with their People's Budget.
What goes around comes around.
So it's been a long time coming, a land tax, but every economist worth their salt will tell you that it's a much better way to get taxation out of the property system.
There's one other thing they're looking like they're running into trouble on, though, is they're floating the idea of raising fuel tax, and there is quite significant resistance to this amongst the Tory backbenchers. And of course, there's lots of new Tory MPs who've won seats that are traditionally Labour seats and working class seats, and they bolster the ranks of Tories who kind of really identify as kind of MPs for the working man on the Conservative benches, like Rob Halfon, who's campaigned on a fuel duty-free since God was a corporal, who's really keen that the fuel tax doesn't go up. He's going to have some support on that.
But they don't need to worry, do they, with an 18 majority? About upsetting backbenchers?
No, but upsetting hauliers who are already going to face difficulties crossing the channel is not a very safe political strategy. You don't want them blockading the roads, and they care a lot about fuel duty. We also know that actually, as we've brought forward the date to the shift to electric cars, which means that revenues from fuel duty is going to go through the floor, because we're going to move to electric cars, which are only taxed at 5%. Thinking long term, that's the change they should be making.
Sure.
And a quick reminder that March 11th is the budget, and Rishi Sunak has did the job
March
on
the
that
11th is the budget, and I would just gently also say, whether I will lose a vote on it is not the only test of whether something's wise to do in politics. If
Yes.
there is significant resistance, even if they'd get it through,
Okay.
Remember the pasty tax?
indeed,
Okay.
or caravans.
Indeed. Before we find any other budget, unpopular budget measures, we're going to swiftly move on and touch on quickly a defence review in turmoil inside the Times as well.
Yeah, so Vernon Gibson, who's former Chief Scientific Advisor at the Ministry of Defence, is an aide who's brought in, I mean, unfortunate timing, because of course they were brought in alongside Andrew Sabisky, who barely touched the sides before leaving number 10.
Controversial advisor.
Indeed. So Vernon Gibson will join officials from our National Security Secretariat in an attempt to boost what's been going on in our defence review. Normally these things happen much more quietly than most departments, who like to conduct a lot of their activity in quasi-public. There are disagreements in the Defence Review about both who's going to sit on the panels, the timetables that they're going to judge them, and those nasty internal politics that the MOD is generally quite good at keeping a lid on are all becoming public.
Very quick word on this.
I mean, the rumour is that Dominic Cummings has asked them to start from the presumption that we will never purchase anything larger than a gun ever again. That level of kind of just laying waste to all of the assumptions about defence. And that's why they haven't really been able to get started, because you're not going to get the Admiral Lord West running the Navy
Labour peer, by the way.
to the table on assumptions like that.
Okay, we are going to take a break right there, but plenty more issues to talk about after the break, including we're going to be talking rubbish, or rather the kids taking a stand against littering. Back in a minute. PR consultant Alex Dean. Welcome back to you too. We're going to turn inside tomorrow's Daily Mail. This is page 6, and the headline is Jihadi textbooks in schools funded by £100 million of our cash.
Yes, it's what the Daily Mail is calling jihadi textbooks. Of course, the Palestinian Authority would take a different view. But what's undeniably true, because they've got some pictures of the content, is that some of the productions that we have, at least theoretically, may not actually be British money that's paid for it. We've paid into a pot that has produced this so-called educational material, which shows people using slingshots against what are captioned, I gather, as Zionists. It's not the sort of thing that British money would wish to go to. People have called for a review. I think they are right to. I think lots of people will make the point, as we were discussing, that every country has its own idea of history. But in the end, if they want to receive British money, it shouldn't go towards things like this.
So presumably the original intention from the Department for International Development is to try and help education in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, the occupied Palestinian territories are incredibly poor, and they're incredibly dependent on aid, not just from the UK, but from a range of other countries in the Middle East to support it, often with a toxic ideology about Israel. And certainly these images and the details are really troubling. The idea that when you're talking about physics and how to calculate the trajectory of a slingshot, the picture that you should be thinking about is
How to hit an Israeli.
How to hit an Israeli soldier. I mean, it doesn't feel right, and it isn't right. But I don't think we can settle this with some sort of simple thing whereby we just either stop giving money or issue, I don't know, BBC-written textbooks. You know, the problems go so much deeper than this. We also know that if we were to withdraw our aid would flow into Palestine from other countries with much more troubling agendas for the Middle East.
We, of course, have a moral imperative about how our money is spent.
I agree entirely. And of course, the government should review this and see whether we can change it. Fundamentally, the problem is two nations with competing claims for the same piece of territory who are at war and have been at war, ruining each other's lives for decades now.
Yeah.
And we aren't any closer to a solution. To me, this is just yet another symptom of a devastating situation.
Sure, but what you say implies equivalence of behaviour. And what the Mail thought to, and what the Mail, just so we don't miss the fact, one of the things Mail says being taught in these schools is applause for Adolf Hitler. Another is that you should be taught to murder Jews. And another is that if you want to learn to read, the story that you use to learn to read through these textbooks is the story of a so-called martyr who killed 13 children. I mean, some of the extremes of what they've identified is revolting. We are quite right to review whether our money is going into it.
Okay, and that's obviously what the Daily Mail is reporting.
Sure.
We can't confirm that ourselves. Okay, let's move on to the front page of The Guardian, shall we? Warning to teachers and doctors over terror referrals.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've seen kind of anecdotal, silly stories whereby, you know, one child, I think, had described his mother in a drawing as a journalist, and it had been misinterpreted by the teacher that it said jihadist, and the poor kid had got reported to Prevent. I think, total mess. The teachers are in a difficult situation when they are concerned about teenagers. It makes sense for them to be able to find out what resources and assistance may be available to them. But the problem is, if the teachers feel like there will be a heavy-handed response to an inquiry, they may report concerns less. I don't think there's an easy way around this, because you have to both be present, be absolutely up in the face of kids who are being radicalized, but without alienating the whole community. And often, of course, the teachers are part of that community.
Yeah, there's a tension between the stated aim of Prevent, which is to protect vulnerable individuals from being drawn into these things, and an increasingly perceived way that it operates, which is to identify, monitor, and sometimes punish extremists. And, you know, if you feel you're helping your student or your patient, you're more likely to participate. If you feel like you're dobbing them in, especially if they're a child, you're far less likely to. And that's the tension that The Guardian is, I think, rightly identifying here. That if you're doctors and teachers, you're thinking about your first responsibility and your first instinct being to support your patient or your student. And stage one of Prevent, they felt very supportive of. If we lose the support of those people doing these important jobs in our community, we'll be the poorer for it.
Okay, and finally, let's whiz on to a story inside the Mail about litter collection, which is a campaign, is it not? The Daily Mail, yes, there we go. It's the British Spring Clean that they've been pushing, and they're highlighting some of their younger helpers in this matter.
Yeah, I mean, two brilliant kids, not even 10, who are involved every day, one of them, certainly every weekend, in picking up litter. The girl pictured there with the bunches and the pink, what's that called? Gilet.
Gilet.
She leads a community group of 60 people who regularly pick up litter in her local park. And she needs the park to exercise because of a health condition. And she's making it better for everyone. Fantastic.
It's a great demonstration of the practical things you can do if, as so many young people in this country and elsewhere are, you're enthused by the environment. It's not something you can only talk about, it's something you actually do something about.
Okay, well, hats off to those two. That's fantastic. And on that note, we will leave it there. But both of you, thanks very much.
Thank you very much
Thanks for having us. Polly and Alex, thank you.